Imagine this. You're walking through a silent, torchlit corridor. The walls are damp with age. The stones beneath your feet echo with every soft step. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a drip, drip, drip. You're not sure if it's water or something else. Welcome to the darker corners of history, where justice was cruel, punishment was creative, and mercy was a rare luxury. Tonight we'll take a slow, gentle descent into some of the most bizarre and unbelievable punishments ever devised by mankind, from methods that were painfully poetic to those that sound too absurd to be true. So, dim the lights, rest your head, and settle into the shadows of the past. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video if you enjoy softly spoken history, and subscribe for more sleepy journeys through time. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight, and what time is it there? Now, close your eyes, and let's begin. Chapter 1. The Drummer's Coffin, Buried Alive in Sound. It was 1632, in a quiet German town nestled in the Saxony woods. The townspeople were asleep, cloaked in the thick stillness of midnight. But from deep within the town square came an eerie beat. Boom! 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 It wasn't thunder, it was the drummer. His name has been lost to time, but his fate is remembered. You see, he had committed what the local court deemed an unforgivable sin, playing a blasphemous song during a church festival. It wasn't just any tune. This one mocked the town's sacred relic, a fragment of bone said to belong to a saint. The punishment? Death. But not by sword or noose. The court demanded a punishment that would echo, one that would be heard for generations. And so they built him a coffin with a twist. It was no ordinary box. It was crafted like a resonant drum, with hollowed wood panels stretched tight with animal skin, sealed from within. As he was placed inside, still alive, they handed him his own drumsticks. The executioners didn't need to lift a finger. They simply sealed the lid shut and left him beneath the gallows. At first the sounds were desperate. Boom, 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 ooh, boom, boom. He was signaling for mercy, perhaps. Maybe he hoped someone would hear and intervene. But no one came. For 3 long days, the drumming continued, fading, from frantic to rhythmic to distant. Some say the beats turned into a slow funeral march. Others say he started to play the same blasphemous song again, defiantly, until his final breath. And then, silence. The people of Saxony spoke of it for years. Children would press their ears to the earth and claim they could still hear the drum, faintly thudding beneath their feet. Whether this tale is truth or just a whispered warning, one thing is certain. In that strange intersection between justice, art and cruelty, this punishment was one of a kind. Take a deep breath, let it go, and prepare to descend deeper into the bizarre. Chapter 2. The Donkey's Burden, a parade of public humiliation. Picture a village in 15th century France. The smell of fresh bread wafts from windows. Horses clop lazily through mud-rutted streets. The bell tower chimes noon. And then the laughter begins, not joyful laughter, but the sharp, mocking laughter of an entire crowd gathered in the square. They've come for a punishment, not of pain but of shame. A man is being led into view. He's not walking, he's crawling. Why? Because he insulted the local bailiff's wife at a tavern, called her a lazy pig after one too many cups of wine. It might have been a joke or it might have been bitterness, but the bailiff didn't laugh. The man's sentence? To become a donkey, literally. They dressed him in rough fur, attached, a tail, even painted long ears on a wooden cap fastened to his head. Then they forced him to bray like a beast. And worst of all, he had to carry firewood strapped to his back, wood he was made to chop himself while crawling on all fours through the village square. The crowd jeered. Some children threw rotten fruit. The baker's boy followed him with a broom, sweeping the donkey's trail. Every few steps, he was ordered to stop and hee-haw loudly. Each failure earned a swat with a real donkey. You see, in medieval Europe, public shame was a currency. It didn't just punish, it erased reputation, made the criminal into a joke, a living cautionary tale. And in the eyes of the court, that was justice. But here's the twist. The man, he was a respected blacksmith, strong, proud, well-known. By reducing him to this absurd spectacle, they didn't break his bones. They broke his place in the world. After the sentence, he left the village. No one knows where he went. Some say he joined a monastery. Others say he wandered until he forgot his own name. But the children in that village still whispered stories of the day the blacksmith became a donkey, because humiliation, once given form, never truly fades. Now, breathe out slowly. Let your muscles soften. You're safe here, but history wasn't always so kind. Next, we'll travel even further, to a punishment that may make your skin crawl. But for now, drift gently through these strange echoes of justice. Chapter 3. The Drunkard's Cloak, when barrels became public shame. Our story now takes us to 17th century England, a land soaked in ale, thick fog, and a sense of moral discipline that often veered into the absurd. Picture the narrow cobbled streets of Newcastle upon Tyne, where gossip moved faster than carts and morality was a matter of public inspection. And in this peculiar place and time, being drunk wasn't just frowned upon, it was punished in one of the most humiliating ways imaginable, with the infamous drunkard's cloak. Now, imagine the scene. It's a brisk morning. The mist still clings to the streets like a secret not yet whispered. Outside the local tavern, a man stumbles. He's been out all night, laughter echoing through the alleys, slurring songs of forgotten kings. But his joyride comes to a sobering halt when the town constable steps in. A crowd gathers, eager. This is about to become theatre. The punishment? A barrel, yes, an actual wooden beer barrel, hollowed out, crudely adapted with holes for arms and legs, is strapped around the drunkard's torso like a grotesque tunic. The man is paraded through the town, stumbling beneath the weight of wood and shame. Children jeer, women shake their heads, and the town crier follows, ringing a bell and calling out his offence to all. This man is a drunkard. Let all who see him learn from his disgrace. The message is clear. In a time before therapy or rehab, public humiliation was the cure. But this punishment wasn't born out of pure cruelty. It was moral correction, served cold. In the 1600s, England was in the grip of Puritan ideals. Sobriety, self-control, and discipline were the virtues of a righteous citizen. Drinking was seen not just as a vice, but as a threat to the moral fabric of society. And so, the authorities devised a spectacle that turned the drunkard into a living warning. The cloak itself was brutal in design, heavy, splintered, and difficult. To balance in, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was physically punishing. Walking became a challenge. Sitting was impossible. The heat inside the barrel in summer made the man sweat and swelter. In winter, the wood chilled him to the bone. Every jostling step scraped and bruised, but perhaps worst of all was the laughter. Because this was the punishment's real sting. It wasn't solitary. It was performative. You weren't locked. Away in shame. You wore your shame, and you walked it through your neighborhood, your marketplace, your church square. People you knew would see you, your employer, your children, your priest, and they would never quite forget the image of you stumbling around in a barrel, a human jest. And it worked, at least according to the authorities. Records show that the mere threat of the drunkard's cloak was often enough to make habitual drinkers curb their nightly excesses. But not always. Some took it with bitter humor, Others cried, and there are accounts of men passing out mid-march, too dizzy from the ale and the weight of their wooden prison. While the punishment was most famously used in England, variations appeared across Europe. In the Holy Roman Empire, shandmantle, or coat of shame versions of the barrel, were used for thieves and gossipers. The logic was universal: make the punishment visible, theatrical, unforgettable. Today, it's almost comical to imagine. A man in a beer barrel, legs sticking out, wobbling down the street like a living cartoon. But for those who endured it, it was a nightmare of ridicule. And so, next time you raise a glass in celebration, take a moment, think of the drunkard's cloak. And remember, there was a time when your pint might have come with a prison. Chapter 4. The Gossip's Bridle. Silence forged in iron. Let's drift now into the misty lanes of early modern Britain, a time when words were weapons, and women who wielded them too freely could find themselves gagged not by argument, but by iron. You awaken to the clamour of 16th century Edinburgh. Horses clatter over uneven stones, merchants shout beneath church bells, and somewhere just down the way a woman screams. It's not pain yet, it's outrage. She's accused of a crime common in the eyes of the law, yet entirely subjective, scolding, nagging, slandering, arguing too much. She has spoken out, perhaps too loudly, perhaps too often. Perhaps she challenged a man in public, or maybe she simply refused to stay silent when silence was expected. Her punishment: the gossip's bridle, also known as the scold's bridle, a name as unsettling as the object itself. 2 burly men escort her through the street. People watch, not with pity, but fascination. A long metal contraption is brought forth. It resembles a helmet, almost knightly at a glance. But look closer, and the horror becomes clear. It is a cage of rusted iron, forged to clamp over a woman's head. It wraps around the skull, enclosing the cheeks, the jaw, and most cruelly, the mouth. Inside, a sharp iron tongue-piece protrudes inward. When the bridle is forced onto her, this metal spike drives against her tongue, pressing it down, rendering speech impossible. Every attempt to talk, to protest, to cry out in pain is met with blood and agony. She is not just gagged, she's silenced, visibly, violently. The design varied from region to region, but all were constructed with theatrical humiliation in mind. Some bridles had bells attached so that the condemned could be heard from a distance as she stumbled through the streets. Others bore grotesque engravings, demonic faces, engraved slurs, turning the punished into a walking, jingling grotesque. And this was not a brief sentence. A woman might wear the bridle for hours. In some cases, she'd be chained to a post in the market square or tied to the stocks, a public display of order restored. People would throw waste at her. Children would mock her. Friends might pretend not to know her. She became a spectacle of what happens to women who talk too much. It's chilling because the punishment wasn't for theft or assault or treason. It was for speech, for being loud, unladylike, unruly. The crime was disobedience. The sentence was silence. And silence back then was more than a virtue. It was a weapon of control. In a world ruled by patriarchal norms, to be a quiet woman was to be a good woman. The gossip's bridle enforced that value with cold, metallic efficiency. Historians have uncovered dozens of surviving bridles across Scotland and England. Many were used well into the 18th century. There are court records, meticulously documented, of women charged as common scolds, troublesome wives, or gossipy maids. They were judged not by injury they caused, but by inconvenience. And the punishment wasn't about correction, it was about fear. Some even died from the ordeal: infections from cuts in the mouth, hypothermia from being exposed in cold weather, or simply the mental breakdown of being so publicly and painfully silenced. Can you imagine the silence of the night after such a punishment? Lying in bed, your mouth still bleeding, your jaw bruised, afraid to speak ever again, afraid of the sound of your own voice. The gossip's bridle was not just a punishment. It was a warning, not just to the woman who wore it, but to every woman who watched. If this tale chilled you, let us know. What time is it where you are, and how far back in time have we taken you tonight? Be sure to like and subscribe for more dark histories. And now let's continue. Chapter 5. The Heretic's Fork. When doubt meant torture. Shadows lengthen as we step now into the flickering candlelit chambers of the Spanish Inquisition, a time of smoke, scripture, and steel. Here, faith was law, and doubt could lead you to devices designed not to kill, but to torment you into confession. Among the many cruel tools of this era was a small, wicked thing known as the Heretic's Fork. It sounds almost comical at first, like something misplaced from a feast, but this wasn't a dining utensil. It was a torture device, forged to punish thought itself. Picture this: a prisoner dragged into a stone chamber deep beneath a monastery. The air is thick with incense and dread. Candles flicker, casting long shadows that dance across instruments of horror lined up on the walls. A monk stands at the ready, reading a list of accusations: heresy, doubt, suspicion of unorthodoxy. The punishment begins not with a whip, but with a fork. The heretic's fork is a short metal rod, tipped with two prongs at either end, like a double-ended tuning fork. It is strapped to the victim's throat and chest, or chin and sternum, so that even the slightest movement, swallowing, nodding, speaking, drives the spikes into tender flesh. There is no blood, not at first, only stillness and pain. Imagine wearing this device for hours, even days. You cannot lower your head to sleep. You cannot speak. You cannot pray. You cannot cry out. The forks dig in. The body trembles under strain, desperate to move, but movement is agony. Inquisitors loved this method. It left no bruises, no external scars. It allowed for questioning over and over while the subject stood motionless in fear. One wrong nod, one instinctive shake of the head, and the pain would flare anew. And this wasn't just physical punishment, it was psychological warfare. The heretic's fork was often paired with other tortures: sensory deprivation, starvation, forced confessions. Prisoners wore it while reciting prayers, knowing any hesitation would be interpreted as guilt. Even a trembling hand or sweat on the brow could be used as evidence of spiritual corruption. The fork's purpose was not truth, it was control, and the accused, once broken, would often recant whatever doubts they held. Some admitted to sins they never committed. Some blamed others. Some were executed anyway, their confession signed in blood and fear. This device, like many in the Inquisition's toolkit, was meant to instill a kind of obedience that went beyond the body. It reached into the soul. It taught you to think the right thoughts, to fear the wrong ones, to submit utterly. And if the victim died while wearing it, there would be no ceremony, no last rites, only silence, and another name added to the ledger. Today, replicas of the heretic's fork can be seen in museums, cold, clean, and untouched by time, but they carry with them echoes of cries that never reach the sky. Chapter 6. The Pear of Anguish, a flower that never bloomed. The night is still. You're walking deeper into the underbelly of the past, through dark corridors of human cruelty, into chambers where screams were once muffled by stone. The walls seem to hum with the memory of pain. In your hand, you find a strange object, metallic, heavy, flower-shaped. At first glance, it resembles the head of a tulip or a mechanical bud. It is beautiful, and then you realize it's not a flower. at all. It is the pear of anguish. Few torture devices in history are as deceptively elegant or horrifyingly designed as this one. Crafted in the shape of a closed iron fruit, the pear consists of 4 metal petals held together by a central screw mechanism. When turned, the petals slowly expand outward, but the true horror lies in where this device was used. There wasn't one pear, there were many, each slightly different, tailored for specific orifices. For women, it was inserted vaginally. For those accused of homosexuality, it was inserted rectally. And for those accused of speaking blasphemy or heresy, the mouth. Let's imagine that moment, grim and ceremonial. A prisoner, stripped of their dignity, is forced into the chair. The inquisitor reads a charge, thinly veiled by theology, but driven by fear. You defied the sacred order. You dared to speak against God, against man, against your role. Then the object is shown, cold, silent, waiting. It is inserted, not swiftly but with slow, deliberate cruelty. The iron invades the body, sharp-edged and unyielding, and then the screw is turned. Each rotation spreads the petals wider. At first a stretch, then a tear, then unimaginable pain. The body's soft tissues cannot withstand it. Muscles rupture, bones can fracture. Screams echo, but no one comes. This was not always a death sentence, but it was never something one walked away from unscarred. Women could be rendered barren. Men were maimed beyond recovery. Victims who received the pear orally often suffered. Broken jaws, shattered teeth, or ruptured throats, choking on blood or their own screams. Yet the psychological terror may have cut deeper than the flesh. The victims often watched the device being prepared. They heard the slow clicking of the mechanism. They felt each awful twist of iron. That anticipation of pain growing like a vine inside them was itself a form of torture. The pear of anguish was not used often, not like the rack or the stocks. It was reserved for those crimes society feared most: sexual deviance, religious blasphemy, rebellious speech. Crimes not of action, but of being. And for that, victims were to be broken from the inside out. And the name, pear, feels almost like a joke. As if to remind you that even things that seem harmless can destroy you, that beauty can cloak horror, that not all punishments wear iron masks. Some bloom like flowers in the dark. Centuries later, many believe this device may have also been used more as a threat than a common tool. Its presence alone, in a dungeon or torture chamber, could be enough to force a confession, to force silence, to force obedience. Now picture yourself back in that chamber. The torchlight dances along the metal petals. You can almost hear the soft creaking as they open. You look away. But in the silence, you wonder how many voices it silenced forever. Are you still with us, traveler? Is it late where you are? Let us know the time and your city. And if you're finding these grim tales strangely fascinating, do give us a like and subscribe for more journeys into the shadows of history. We're only just beginning. Chapter 7. The Drunkard's Cloak. Wear your shame like a coat. Now step with me outside the dungeons for a moment. Not all punishments were hidden behind walls or screamed through iron. Some were carried out in full daylight, in the heart of the village, surrounded by laughter, ridicule, and the ever-judging eyes of your neighbors. This is the tale of the Drunkard's Cloak, a punishment equal parts comedy and cruelty. But look closer, and you'll find it's far more chilling than it first appears. Imagine, it's 17th century England. The alehouses are overflowing, the streets stink of wet straw and smoke, and among the slurred voices and stumbling feet is a man who's gone too far, again, drunk in public, cursing, falling into a trough, maybe urinating on a cartwheel, maybe starting a brawl over a spilled pint. He's arrested, not to be locked away, but to be displayed. The next morning, the townspeople gather in the square. Laughter ripples through the crowd as the constable drags out the sentence. A wooden barrel, hollowed out and reinforced with iron straps. A hole is cut at the top for the head, and 2 more for the arms. The man is forced inside. The barrel is strapped to his shoulders like a tunic. It is heavy, suffocating, clumsy. He can barely move. His feet stumble beneath the weight. And yet, he is ordered to walk through the town, through the mud, through the markets, while children throw scraps and adults jeer. It's absurd. A man turned into a walking keg. People laugh, but he doesn't. Because this isn't just punishment, it's ritual humiliation. The message is clear. Your shame belongs to us now. The townsfolk don't just witness it. They participate in it, they fuel it. In some towns, the drunkard is forced to perform chores while wearing the cloak, sweeping streets, cleaning latrines, scrubbing steps, all while wrapped in this suffocating barrel, sweating, staggering, and mocked at every turn. The cloak was especially popular during Puritan rule, when public morality was strictly enforced. Drinking to excess was seen not only as a vice, but a threat to social order, and so the drunkard's cloak became a walking sermon. Look at this man. See what indulgence leads to. But it didn't end with humiliation. The physical toll was real. Barrels were heavy, some over 50 pounds. Victims often collapsed. In cold months, the wood could freeze. Splinters tore into the skin. The neck and shoulders ached for days after. And if someone fell over while wearing it, they couldn't get up without help. They'd writhe like beetles on their backs, trapped in a wooden prison. What's worse, this punishment wasn't reserved only for men. Records from Germany and the Netherlands show women forced into similar devices, especially those accused of being drunk and disorderly. Some barrels bore painted slogans, "This is my punishment," or "So let all drunkards be." Others were adorned with bells to draw more attention. Over time, the cloak became so iconic that towns competed over the most elaborate ones. Some even added horns, caricatured faces, or mock wings. It became a twisted kind of street theatre, with one poor soul as the unwilling actor. And yet, the most devastating part: the social aftermath. Long after the barrel was removed, its memory lingered. Employers hesitated to hire you, neighbors whispered, children pointed. In small communities, reputation was everything, and once tarnished, it rarely recovered. The drunkard's cloak didn't just punish the body, it haunted the spirit. So, next time you see someone stumbling down a sidewalk, imagine instead a wooden barrel tied to their chest, a crowd mocking from all sides, and realize how thin the line is between laughter and cruelty. Chapter 8. The Brazen Bull. Screams turned to music. You find yourself wandering again through halls echoing with forgotten agony. Your feet brush against sand, dry and lifeless. Somewhere in the distance, fire crackles softly and a scent of scorched iron lingers in the air. You pass pillars etched with ancient script, and then you see it. Standing ominously atop a blackened stone platform is a life-sized bull cast entirely from bronze. Its flanks shine dully in the firelight. Its mouth is slightly open. But this is no statue of worship. This is the brazen bull, one of the most horrifying inventions of punishment ever forged. Let me take you back to ancient Greece, to the tyrant Phalaris of Akragas in Sicily, a man who ruled with an iron fist and demanded not just loyalty, but obedience through terror. Legend tells us that a man named Perilos, a craftsman of curious skill, approached the tyrant with an offer, a new method of execution, one that would strike fear into the hearts of enemies and traitors alike. He unveiled the brazen bull. Its design was as brilliant as it was nightmarish, hollow inside, with a trapdoor carved into the side. The condemned would be placed within the belly of the beast. Then a fire would be lit beneath its iron belly, slowly roasting the prisoner alive from the inside. But the true cruelty lay in its acoustics. The bull's head wasn't just decorative. Inside the mouth was a clever system of tubes and vents. As the victims screamed, their voice was channeled through this system, distorted by the curves of the metal until it emerged as something else entirely. A strange, muffled, animalistic cry. It sounded like a bull. The execution became a performance. The fire flickered, the smoke curled from the bull's nostrils, and the howls of agony spilled out not as human anguish, but as the bellowing of an enraged beast. It was spectacle, theatre, and death, all in one. Phalaris was reportedly delighted. So delighted, in fact, that he decided to test it immediately on the inventor himself. Yes, Perillos, the man who dreamed up the brazen bull, became its first victim. He was thrown inside by his own patron. Whether as a warning or out of sheer poetic justice, we may never know. What we do know is that history has rarely seen a punishment so cruelly artistic. And what does it say about us? That we turn death into a musical instrument. But the brazen bull wasn't merely about execution, it was about control, fear. The message was simple: defy me, and you will not simply die. You will become part of the myth. Your pain will become a song. Stories of the bull traveled far. Some say the Romans used versions of it. Others claim it stood as a warning in foreign courts. The truth is, whether it was used once or 100 times, the idea of it was enough. The terror it invoked, the image it burned into the collective mind, that was the real punishment. Picture now, just for a moment, the silence before the screams, the darkness inside the bronze chamber, the rising heat, the slow dawning realization that your cries are no longer your own, that your very suffering has become a showpiece for others to admire. That is the brazen bull, a beast that did not charge or gore or breathe, but sang. Chapter 9. Scaphism. Death by milk and honey. This one is not for the faint of heart. You may want to lay back, take a deep breath and brace yourself, because now we drift further east, into the vast empire of the ancient Persians, where a punishment so vile, so grotesque, was conceived that even death itself looked away. It was called Scaphism, or simply the boats. The name alone gives no hint of the horror, but let me describe it to you slowly, so you can see it clearly, as if you were there. A condemned man is led to a quiet bank of stagnant water. No gallows, no arena, just the soft lapping of algae-covered ponds and reeds swaying in the wind. Two hollowed-out wooden boats lie waiting, shaped like coffins without lids. The man is stripped naked. He pleads, cries. It doesn't matter. He is placed inside one boat, his body nestled into the hollow. Then the second boat is placed on top, sandwiching him in, head, hands and feet left exposed. Trapped. But this is no ordinary execution. Next, the jailers bring milk, bowls of it, honey too. They force him to drink the milk, gallons of it, until he gags. They pour more down his throat, and then they slather the honey across his face, his arms, his genitals, his eyelids. Every inch of exposed skin is coated in the sweet, sticky substance. Then they leave him, floating on the water under the hot sun. At first it seems almost kind. He's not beaten, he's not burned. But soon the true nature of this punishment reveals itself. The milk begins to rot inside his stomach. Diarrhea follows. His waste pools beneath him in the boat. The stench is unbearable, but more than that, it attracts visitors. Flies, ants, wasps, worms, beetles, insects of every kind. Swarm toward the feast. They begin to burrow, to lay eggs into his wounds, his nostrils, his eyes, his flesh. Day after day they feed. The man cannot move. He cannot swat them away. He is fully conscious, fully aware, as his body becomes a living ecosystem of decay. Birds land and peck. Maggots squirm beneath his skin. The sun blisters his face. His eyes dry out, his lips crack, his tongue swells, and he does not die quickly. Scaphism was designed to prolong death. Victims could survive for days, even weeks, each moment a fresh torment, starving yet fed, rotting yet alive. Some accounts say victims cried out for death by the fourth day, begging executioners to end their misery. But that mercy never came. 1. Of the most detailed accounts comes from Plutarch, who describes a Persian soldier named Mithridates, punished this way for killing a nobleman. His torture lasted 17 days. 17. Imagine lying in your own filth for 2.5 weeks, your flesh slowly eaten from the outside in, your body a feast for every crawling thing nature can offer. This was not punishment for theft or drunkenness. This was reserved for traitors, for those who betrayed kings, for those whose deaths needed to send a message that would echo across generations. And it did. Even today, the word scaphism is spoken only in the darkest corners of history. A punishment so cruel it was almost lost to time, almost too terrible to be true. But multiple ancient sources confirm its existence. Some modern scholars still debate the finer details, but the essence remains: a death not of violence, but of slow, methodical consumption. The boats were your coffin. The honey, your lure. The milk, your curse. And the insects, your executioners. It was a death of slow unraveling, a lesson written in agony. Chapter 10. Flaying alive. The art of skin step, carefully. The floor beneath your feet has changed. Gone is the soft soil and the ash-covered stones of earlier chambers. Now it is something else, slick, shiny, and red. The walls breathe with a sickly warmth, as if you are walking through something alive. You try not to imagine what once covered these walls, or who it belonged to. This is the chamber of flaying. We begin in ancient Assyria, a civilization that left behind stunning stone carvings, mighty temples, and detailed accounts of horror. In the city of Nineveh, punishment was not only a tool, it was a canvas, and the most feared of these was skinning alive. Yes, you heard that right. To flay someone is to remove the skin from their body while they still breathe. But the Assyrians didn't just do this in secret dungeons. No, they did it publicly, as a show of power, as a performance. The condemned, often rebels or prisoners of war, were bound upright against a wall. And then the process would begin. First, sharp knives would make long incisions along the arms, the legs, the back. And then the skin was peeled, slowly, carefully. You see, the goal wasn't a quick death, quite the opposite. The executioner had to be precise, skilled in anatomy, remove too much too fast, and the victim would bleed out, but done properly. The condemned could remain alive for hours, even a full day, as the largest organ of their body, the skin, was stripped away. Some cried. Some went silent from the shock. But all eventually collapsed, either from blood loss, infection, or the sheer agony of exposure. The raw nerves beneath the skin screamed with every gust of wind, every grain of dust. The body, now without its shield, could no longer regulate heat. They would burn, freeze, tremble. But the punishment didn't end there. The Assyrians would then display the flayed skin. It was stretched out like parchment, nailed to the city gates, the walls, or the temples. Sometimes it was draped over statues. Messages were carved beneath it in stone, etched for the conquered to read. This is the fate of those who resist. And what of the victims? Their names are lost, but their skins became history, silent warnings in the wind. The practice spread through time. In medieval Europe, Flaying appeared again, as punishment for treason. The English chronicler Holinshed wrote of men whose skins were torn from them in great pieces whilst they were yet alive. In China, it was said that corrupt officials might be flayed and their hides displayed over the chairs they once governed from, a grotesque symbol of failed duty. Even as late as the 18th century, stories from Mughal India tell of rebels being skinned in public squares, an ancient lesson revived yet again. But perhaps the most chilling part: the human body has 18 square feet of skin. That is enough to create a full cloak, a flag, a tapestry. And throughout history, it did. There are whispers of books bound in human skin, of ancient grimoires and judicial ledgers where the flayed hides of criminals were tanned into leather. Some even survive to this day, kept under glass in libraries, their origins only recently confirmed by DNA tests. Think about that. Someone's body turned into parchment, a living man reduced to material. Flaying was not just death, it was erasure, humiliation, a symbolic shredding of identity. They didn't want to kill you. They wanted to unmake you. So as you rest, tonight, picture not just the knife, but the steady hand behind it, the crowd watching, the drums beating, and the wall that awaits your remains. Chapter 11. Sawing in half. From groin to grave. You hear the sound before you see it, a slow, grating rasp, back and forth, back and forth. Wood? No. This sound is wetter, more organic. You turn the corner, and there it is, a body, upside down, hanging by the ankles, arms limp, face twisted in a final scream, and at the midpoint of that body, a saw. Welcome to one of history's most grotesque forms of execution, sawing in half. Let me guide you gently into the horror. This punishment was used across various cultures, Persia, China, Europe, but the most vivid accounts come from the Middle Ages. Picture a traitor condemned, not to hanging, not to burning, but to the saw. And not just any sawing. The executioners didn't start at the neck. Oh no, that would be over too quickly. They started at the groin. Here's how it worked. The condemned was tied upside down, ankles bound, head pointed toward the ground. This position served a dual purpose. First, it ensured that blood flowed down into the brain, keeping the victim conscious for as long as possible. Second, it exposed the softest, most vulnerable point, the groin. Two men would then begin the task. A long, two-handled saw, sharp, heavy. They'd place the teeth right between, the victim's legs pressed gently, and then begin back and forth, back and forth. The saw tore through flesh, muscle, bone. At first, the screams were deafening, but as the saw advanced, through the pelvis, through the abdomen, shock would begin to set in, and still, the heart pumped. Still, the blood fed the brain. The victim remained alive, watching, feeling, until the saw reached the diaphragm, or perhaps even higher. Some died halfway. Some survived until the saw reached their chest. It depended on the speed, the experience of the executioners, and the mercy or cruelty of the judges watching. In medieval Spain, this method was reportedly used against heretics. In the Ottoman Empire, it was said to be reserved for spies and traitors. Chinese records from the Tang dynasty describe similar executions for political enemies. And in Eastern Europe, tales abound of invaders and dissenters who met the saw. But why upside down? Because pain wasn't enough. The goal was terror, spectacle. This was about control, to make a man see his death as it happened, to keep his mind intact even as his body was cut in two. It was a punishment not of swift justice, but of deliberate unmaking. Imagine the humiliation, stripped, bound, displayed before a jeering crowd. The final moments of your life consumed not by fire or blade, but by the slow, methodical sound of steel on bone. back and forth, back and forth. Some paintings survive, woodcuts too. They show the upside-down body, the saw midway through the torso, blood pouring in rivers beneath. To us, it may seem like barbaric art, but to them it was law, order, retribution. And the worst part? Sometimes the sawing stopped just before death. Yes, in rare instances, the punishment was interrupted just before the final breath. The body, nearly halved, was taken down and left to die slowly, or in some cases, paraded through the streets as a lesson. You were not a person. You were a message. So tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, remember this. In history, justice was not always blind. Sometimes it stared you down and sawed you in half. Chapter 12, Scaphism, the boats of rot and ruin. Shh! Listen closely. Do you hear the hum of insects, the gentle lapping of water against wood, the muffled, half-sane whisper of someone begging for death? You've stepped into a still marsh, somewhere deep in the ancient Persian Empire, a forgotten stretch of reeds and mud where time stops and the body begins to rot while still alive. This is Scaphism, perhaps the most excruciating death ever conceived by man. The word comes from the Greek scaphi, meaning boat, but this is no ordinary vessel. It's a coffin split in two, hollowed-out tree trunks, shaped to encase a human body snugly from head to toe. Let's begin. The condemned is laid into the bottom half of the boat, naked. Their limbs are stretched out, arms and legs protruding, through holes so they can't move. Then the second boat, like a lid, is placed over them, enclosing the torso and sealing them into a human-sized capsule. And now, the real punishment begins. First, they are force-fed, milk and honey, gallons of it, over and over until their stomach bloats, until nausea rises, until the inevitable happens. They vomit, they defecate, and the feeding does not stop. Their body becomes a fermenting vat of its own waste. Next, the executioners coat their skin, face, limbs, even genitals, in more honey. Thick, sticky, glistening honey. They smear it into every crevice, every pore, and then they leave them. Alone, in the sun. At first, the prisoner screams from the heat, the confinement, the humiliation. But as the hours pass, the honey draws attention. Flies, wasps, ants, beetles. At first they crawl, then they bite, then they burrow. You see, the person cannot move. They are a feast. The insects enter the nostrils, the eyes, the ears, the anus. And deep inside, within the stomach and intestines, something is brewing. That milk and honey curdle and rot, creating a stench that attracts even more scavengers. Maggots appear in the feces, and still the man breathes. Still his heart beats. Day turns to night. The stars pass overhead. They are not allowed to die quickly. The Persians would return daily to feed them again. Milk, honey, waste. And so the cycle continues. Swell, rot, feed. According to Plutarch, one man, a soldier who tried to assassinate the king, survived 17 days this way. 17 days of festering, swelling, decaying while alive. His skin softened and peeled. His flesh became sponge-like. The insects made colonies, and by the time death arrived, he was no longer a man, but a living ecosystem. Scaphism wasn't just death. It was a slow disintegration of identity, a man transformed into filth from both inside and out. Why such cruelty? Because in the Persian mind, to be devoured alive by nature itself was the ultimate dishonor. Your soul would not ascend, your name would not be spoken, you were unmade by the very world you betrayed. Tonight, as you lie in your soft bed, imagine the opposite. No escape, no movement, no death, only the buzzing, the crawling, the slow melting of your mind beneath honey and sun. Still awake? Let us know your time zone in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if these stories are your kind of nightmares, remember to like and subscribe for more true horrors from our past. Chapter 13. Iron Shoes, the Dance of Endless Pain. Step lightly now. The floor here is hard, metallic. The walls echo your footfalls like a cathedral of pain. In the center of the room, a pair of shoes, but not just any shoes. They glint in the torchlight, shaped like dainty slippers, but made entirely of iron. Welcome to one of the strangest punishments history has hidden from us, the iron shoes, a punishment not meant to kill you fast, but to make your every step a reminder. Let us go back to medieval Central Europe, where this torture was whispered in villages across Hungary, Poland, and the Balkans. It was reserved for those accused of terrible sins, murderers, witches, and traitors, but above all, it was a punishment for shame. First, the blacksmiths would forge a pair of shoes made of solid iron, shaped carefully to fit the prisoner's feet, but just a bit too tight. Not enough to cause damage at first, but enough that once heated, they would meld into the skin. The prisoner was brought forward, barefoot. The shoes were placed in the coals of a roaring fire, heated until glowing red, and then hammered onto the feet. The flesh sizzled on contact, skin blackened, toes blistered. The iron clamped down like jaws, but the cruelty didn't stop there. Once the shoes were secured, the prisoner was forced to walk. Some were paraded through town squares, surrounded by guards. Others were tied to posts and made to dance for an audience. Every step shredded the nerves further. Blood pooled at the toes, tendons tore. The heat of the iron would sometimes cauterize the wounds, preventing quick death, but also prolonging the agony. And if the shoes cooled, they would reheat them, with the feet still inside. Some variations of the iron shoes included spikes inside the sole, tiny, sharp nails aimed upward. The longer the walk, the deeper they pierced. There are records of women accused of heresy being made to march through villages like this, bleeding, burned, broken. Their punishment served a dual purpose, to cause pain and to shame them before the community. In folklore, witches were said to be condemned to wear iron shoes that were heated again and again in hell, never dying, always walking. The Brothers Grimm even recorded a variation in their tales, a wicked queen made to dance in red-hot iron shoes until she collapsed, screaming. But this wasn't just story. Inquisition records from the 15th century speak of metal shoes affixed and brought to glow, used in the punishment of those who would not confess. It's even said that a Hungarian noblewoman accused of poisoning her husband was marched through the streets in them until her legs collapsed beneath her. She died hours later. Her feet were found fused to the metal. The punishment was slow, personal, and utterly inhuman. Unlike flaying or beheading, there was no quick release, no moment of mercy, just endless trudging pain, step by step, until the shoes either cooled or your legs gave out. Tonight, when you swing your legs off the bed and feel the cool floor beneath your feet, pause. Imagine those shoes waiting, still warm from the fire, still hungry. Chapter 14. The Iron Chair. A throne forged in agony. Sit down. Slowly. Feel the cold metal press against your back, your thighs, the nape of your neck. It's not a comfortable seat. It was never meant to be. This is not a throne of power or rest. This is the iron chair, and to sit upon it was to suffer in silence for hours, days, or until the soul gave out. Let us travel now to medieval Europe, particularly Italy, France, and Germany, where torture was a science and spectacle rolled into one. The iron chair, also known as la chaise de l'enfer, or chair of hell, was one of its masterpieces. At first glance, it resembled a regal chair, sturdy, upright, with thick armrests and a tall backrest. But look closer, and you'll see the truth. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of metal spikes protruding from every surface, the back, the seat, the arms, even the leg supports. Each spike was sharpened, not to pierce deeply, but just enough to puncture the skin when any pressure was applied. The goal was not instant death, it was terror. The moment the victim was seated, the pain began. Every movement drove dozens of spikes deeper, but staying still did nothing to stop the blood from flowing. Now imagine you are accused of heresy or witchcraft, or perhaps you've simply offended the wrong nobleman. You're brought into a dim chamber, your arms already bruised from shackles. The guards are silent. They don't need to speak. They simply point to the chair. You beg, you plead, but there is no mercy. Two men lift you and slam you down into it. The spikes drive through your clothes, through your skin. You scream. They lash your wrists and ankles to the armrests and footrests, binding you tight. The chair welcomes you fully, and then they tighten a belt around your chest, forcing your spine hard against the backrest, pushing your flesh onto the cold metal thorns behind. The spikes do not pierce vital organs. They are not meant to. Instead, they create shallow wounds, hundreds of them, enough to cause you to bleed slowly from dozens of sites. Sometimes heat was added. Charcoal or coals were placed beneath the chair, turning the metal into a searing furnace. The spikes began to cook the wounds from within. The iron hissed, the blood boiled, and you could smell your own flesh beginning to roast. The iron chair could be used as an interrogation tool or as a method of execution. Some victims sat for hours, bleeding and blistering, until shock overtook them. Others were left for days, untended, until infection set in. Gangrene, septic fever, death. Why such a chair? Because the authorities believed in public deterrence. The iron chair was sometimes used in public executions, wheeled into plazas for all to see. The prisoner would be strapped in while the crowd watched, their agony laid bare. Children would scream, adults would turn away, but they would all remember. The message was clear: disobey, and this could be your seat. There's no known number of how many died on these chairs, but archaeological remains in torture chambers across Europe show variations. Some chairs had spikes on the headrest, ensuring even the slightest nod would cause agony. Others had mechanical levers to press the victim harder onto the spikes. It was psychological as much as physical. The moment you sat, you were already lost. So tonight, as you recline in your bed soft and safe, spare a thought for those who sat in silence, pierced and burning, on thrones that only pain could crown. Chapter 15. Breaking Wheel. The circle of shattered flesh. The crowd gathers early. Fathers hoist children onto their shoulders. Vendors hawk wine and stale bread. There's a hum in the air, not of joy, but anticipation. Something brutal is about to unfold. A spectacle, a warning, a ritual soaked in screams. This is the breaking wheel, also called the Catherine wheel, one of the most savage execution methods in all of history. Let's return to medieval Germany and France around the 14th century. The wheel stood tall, wooden and wide, like a wagon wheel stripped from its axle. But this was no vehicle. It was an instrument of obliteration. First, the victim was led to the scaffold. Often stripped naked, their body already weakened by torture. A priest might offer final rites, but only if the crime wasn't too unforgivable. Then came the binding. The condemned was tied down, sometimes to the wheel itself, sometimes to a plank below it. Their limbs were stretched wide, splayed open to the sky. And then came the executioner, wielding a heavy iron bar or hammer. He began with the legs. With precise, bone-shattering strikes, he brought the bar down on the shins, the thighs, the arms, the collarbone. Each swing meant to break a bone without killing outright. A skilled executioner could shatter dozens of bones without rupturing the organs. This was called breaking on the wheel. The body contorted, limbs folding in, unnatural directions. Sometimes the joints popped out entirely, the bones tore through the skin. The victims screamed until the pain collapsed their voice. But it didn't end there. Once the limbs were broken, the body was threaded through the spokes of the wheel itself. Yes, woven like a grotesque tapestry. Arms and legs twisted between the wooden gaps. The wheel was then hoisted upright like a crucifix and mounted on a pole for the public to see. There they hung, still alive, still breathing, left to die from exposure, dehydration, or shock. Sometimes it took hours, sometimes days. Birds would begin to circle. The crows came next, and in colder regions winter was no reprieve. The frozen wind only slowed death further. Your breath became frost, until the last exhale vanished into the snow. This punishment was for the worst crimes, murder, treason, infanticide, but it was also used politically. Rulers made examples of rebels this way. Their message was etched into every broken bone: disobedience ends in ruin. In some cases, the final blow was a coup de grace, a mercy stroke to the heart or throat, but even that was rare. The body remained on the wheel for days, sometimes weeks. Insects fed, skin peeled, bones whitened in the sun. And for the people watching, it worked. Children would not forget. Criminals would reconsider. The wheel spoke a language louder than words: fear. Even today, the phrase, broken on, the wheel, survives in idioms and legends. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, for whom one version of the wheel is named, was said to have faced it and shattered it through divine intervention. But most were not so lucky. So the next time you look at something round, a bicycle, a steering wheel, a carousel, remember once, wheels did not carry you forward, they tore you apart. Chapter 16. The Coffin Torture. Death standing still. The sun was high and the square was quiet, but you could feel it, that terrible sinking feeling in your gut, the one that told you something was watching. At first you might not see it. A metal frame, tall as a man, shaped like an iron skeleton. It stood in the center of the courtyard, unmoving. But step closer, and you'd notice something worse. A man was inside. Arms pinned, knees bent awkwardly, his eyes wide open, mouth agape, too dry to scream, too broken to beg. This was the coffin torture, also known as the iron cage, and it was one of the cruelest punishments inflicted during the Middle Ages. This method wasn't designed to pierce or flay. Its weapon was much simpler: stillness. Total, unbearable stillness. Let us go back to 13th century England or Germany, where law and punishment were designed to keep the people obedient and terrified. The coffin was used for a range of crimes: blasphemy, theft, adultery, even minor heresies. The condemned were placed inside a human-shaped cage made of iron bars, just wide enough to allow the body in, and nothing else. The cruel trick? The cage was one size fits all, so if you were too tall, your knees were bent to fit. If you were too short, your arms were stretched. Too fat? Then the bars dug into your ribs and gut. No one fit perfectly. That was the point. Once you were in, the top snapped shut. There was no sitting, no leaning. You couldn't shift your weight. Any movement became agony. Over time, your muscles cramped, your joints locked, your feet swelled, and your lungs fought to expand in your restricted frame. The cage was then hoisted in the air, often just above the ground, and placed in a busy square or hung from the side of a castle wall. And then you waited. It could take days to die, sometimes longer. The birds came first, crows, ravens. They circled and landed on the iron beams, pecking at your skin, your eyes, your ears. They were clever. If they couldn't get to your flesh, they'd wait until flies did. The flies always came. Your body would blister under the sun. Rain soaked your wounds. Night froze your breath. You were public property now, an example, and the townspeople passing by would throw things, rotten fruit, filth, stones. They'd laugh. Children would be told, "See what happens when you steal." But the worst part wasn't the pain, or the cold, or even the slow decay. It was the loneliness. You were still conscious, alive, aware, as your body gave up inch by inch. Your bladder emptied, your bowels failed, and all you could do was watch. Some victims died in 3 days. Others lasted nearly a week. If they were lucky, someone might beg for mercy and deliver a swift blow. But most were left to rot, turning the cage into a hanging corpse, a warning that swung in the wind. Even in death, the punishment endured. And after all that, the cage was reused, cleaned, readied for the next soul to be locked inside, a revolving door of suffering. No one remembers the names of those who died in the coffins, only the silence that followed them. Chapter 17. The soaring punishment. Death from the groin up. It begins upside down, your world spinning, blood rushing to your head. You're tied by your ankles, legs spread apart, suspended from a frame. Below you stands a man with a 2-man saw, its teeth sharpened and gleaming. In the firelight, there's no blindfold, no chance to look away. This is the sawing punishment. One of the most gruesome executions ever devised, used across medieval Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and even in parts of Asia. A method so horrifying, so intimate in its violence, it's said to have made even the executioners pale. The condemned was hung upside down, not by the neck or shoulders, but by the feet. Gravity, you see, was not just for effect. It was a tool. The blood, pulled toward the brain, kept the victim conscious longer, sometimes all the way until the blade reached the chest. And then the sawing began. The executioners, 2 men, would position themselves on either side of the body, gripping the handles of a large cross-cut saw. They started at the groin. Yes, you heard that right. The first pull of the blade severed skin. The second, muscle. Then came the pelvis, bones cracking like firewood. The saw cut slowly, not to be merciful but to prolong the pain. Inch by inch they worked their way up, through the intestines, the stomach, the rib cage. If the blade struck wrong, the victim might die early. But often they remained alive until the saw neared the sternum. It was not merely an execution. It was a performance. Sometimes this was carried out in public in broad daylight. Crowds would form, pressed shoulder to shoulder, holding their breath as the screams pierced the air. The condemned often flailed, restrained only by the ropes. Blood poured downward in thick ropes. Other times it was done in secret. A punishment. For betrayal, for spies, for conspirators. It sent a message. Betray the wrong man and you won't just die. You'll be opened. Why so brutal? Because this method destroyed the body's dignity. There was no martyrdom in sawing, no peaceful passing. The body was mutilated beyond recognition. The soul, some believed, would be too broken to find rest. Variations existed. In some cultures, they used thinner blades, others heated the saw first. In rare cases, the blade was dull, intentionally so, to draw the act out over hours. One tale from the Ottoman era tells of a nobleman accused of treason. He denied everything, but the Sultan ordered the saw anyway. His execution lasted 2 hours, and by the end, the square was so soaked with blood that even the dogs refused to enter. But perhaps the worst horror was not the act, but the waiting. Many victims spent their final night staring at the saw, knowing exactly where it would begin. They could smell the iron, hear it scrape against stone, and in their dreams they were already screaming. Today, the image of the sawing execution still appears in woodcuts and medieval manuscripts, always shrouded in blood, and though it vanished with time, its legend remains. Next time you see a carpenter's saw, listen closely, you might hear it whisper. Chapter 18, Scaphism, the Boats of Eternal Decay. Close your eyes. Imagine you're lying between two boats, your arms and legs spread wide. Above you, the sun is merciless. Beneath you, wood slick with old blood. You can hear the buzz, the constant, never-ending buzz, flies, wasps, beetles. You can't move. You can't escape. You've been sentenced to scaphism, one of the most horrifying punishments ever devised by mankind. Scaphism, also known as the boats, was a method of slow, agonizing death by exposure, vermin, and decay, reportedly practiced in ancient Persia. Here's how it worked. The condemned was laid naked inside a hollowed-out wooden boat or canoe. Another boat was placed on top, sandwiching the body but leaving the arms, legs, and head sticking out. The boats were then tied tightly together, making it impossible to move. But death did not come quickly. This was not a punishment of the sword or the flame. No, scaphism was a death of digestion, of bloating, of oozing, of rotting alive. The executioners would begin by force-feeding the victim a mixture of milk and honey, buckets of it poured down until they vomited, and then even more forced in. The body couldn't process the flood of lactose and sugar. Diarrhea set in rapidly, filling the bottom of the boat with waste. But that was only step one. Next, they would take honey and smear it generously over the face, eyelids, ears, hands, feet, and genitals. Every exposed inch of skin became a lure, an offering to the insects of the swamp. Then the boat was floated out into a stagnant pond or left under the blazing sun. It wouldn't take long. Flies landed first, ants followed, wasps came later. They crawled into every opening, mouth, nostrils, ears, even the soft tissue beneath the nails. They laid eggs in the warm, moist folds of skin. Maggots were born inside the body before it was even dead. The bloated belly, filled with milk and heat, rotted from within. The waste attracted worms and beetles who burrowed through flesh softened by sun and moisture. The victim, fully conscious for days, could feel every squirming movement and the smell. Imagine the stench of a dying man, caked in filth, cooking in the sun, swarmed by a living blanket of insects. Death didn't come for days. Some reports speak of victims lasting 10, even 12 days, their minds slipping slowly into madness, as their flesh liquefied beneath the wood. The condemned often begged, not for release, but for death. But none came. The Persians believed in punishment as spectacle, a warning visible from the shore, one that lingered long after the screams fell silent. When the boats were finally opened, the body would be unrecognizable. Skin blackened, bones gnawed clean in places, organs spilling into the hollow, and yet often the eyes were still wide open, frozen in terror. Scaphism is not only one of the cruelest punishments in recorded history, it is one of the slowest. A punishment that transformed a man into a living tomb, decaying hour by hour, fed upon by the very earth that once sustained him. So next time you sit quietly by a still pond and hear the buzz of a fly, ask yourself, what is it feeding? Chapter 19. Breaking on the Wheel. The turning of bones. It was called the Catherine Wheel, though St. Catherine had little to do with it. In medieval Europe, to be sentenced to the breaking wheel was to be condemned to one of the most agonizing deaths ever performed in public. a method of execution where your body was systematically shattered, joint by joint, until all that remained was a breathing bag of splinters. The ritual began in the public square early in the morning. The wheel, massive and wooden like something torn off a cart, stood upright awaiting its victim. The condemned was led out, often naked, tied hand and foot to a large wooden cross or flat frame. Around them, the crowd gathered. Not just adults, children came too. This was spectacle. This was entertainment. The executioner approached, iron bar in hand, cold, heavy, unforgiving. One by one, he would bring the bar down with full force upon the limbs of the condemned. Starting at the ankles, he shattered the bones with a sickening crack, then the shins, the knees, the femurs. Every blow was calculated to break but not kill, to keep the man alive as his body was reduced to meat and splinters. The arms were next. Elbows, wrists, shoulders, each bone snapped clean or shattered entirely. The victim could no longer scream. They simply gurgled, moaned, or begged for death. But death had no appointment. It came only when permitted. Once every limb was broken, limp, twisted, unrecognizable, the victim was lifted onto the wheel itself. Their pulverized body was woven between the spokes, arms and legs, bent grotesquely through the gaps, creating a grisly pattern of broken humanity. Then the wheel was raised, mounted upright on a tall pole, and there the condemned hung, splayed in the shape of a sun, visible for miles. Sometimes they died quickly, sometimes they lingered, breathing, groaning, blinking, for 2 days or more. Birds came, of course, pecking at the soft flesh, pulling open the wounds. The sun burned, the rain chilled, and the people watched. In some traditions, a final mercy blow, a strike to the heart or neck, was delivered, but not always. That decision belonged to the king or the church or the mob. Occasionally, if the victim was a noble, he would be allowed to face execution on the breaking bench instead, where the wheel was used like a bludgeon and not a frame. A small mercy. But for commoners, thieves, murderers, heretics, the wheel became their crucifix. Sometimes their bones were so thoroughly destroyed that the remains flowed like cloth when cut down, and the wheel was left behind, soaked in blood, as a reminder. Even centuries later, the term "broken on the wheel" echoes in literature and legend as a fate worse than death. And in some corners of Europe, old wheels still hang in ruined towns, symbols of justice or vengeance, depending on which side you were on. So next time you see a wagon wheel, look closer, listen. You might hear the bones crack, still echoing through the wood. Chapter 20. Flaying Alive, the Art of Peeling a Soul. Imagine standing in a dusty courtyard. The sun is low, casting long shadows across cracked stone and dry earth. The silence is broken only by the sound of sharp metal scraping leather. But it's not leather at all. It's skin. This is the sentence of flaying alive, a punishment so ancient, so barbaric, that even time itself winces at its memory. Used by ancient empires such as the Assyrians, medieval Europeans, and Mesoamerican civilizations, flaying was not just a method of execution. It was a message carved into flesh, a warning, a lesson, a curse. The condemned, often a rebel, a traitor, or someone who defied a king, was stripped and bound, tied upright to a pole, or sometimes crucified. Then the executioner would step forward, not with a sword, but with a knife. A small, thin-bladed knife, and with a precision born of horror, he would begin to slice beneath the skin, often starting at the feet or lower legs. The goal wasn't speed, it was spectacle. The knife slid just under the surface, lifting the skin away like peeling a fruit, only slower. Inch by inch, flesh was separated from muscle, sinew, and bone. The condemned wouldn't die immediately. In fact, many remained conscious for hours, The body, stripped of its outer layer, responds with shock, with searing pain, and then, eventually, silence. But sometimes they were kept awake intentionally, fed water, their wounds salted or coated in herbs to delay death and prolong suffering. Flaying was performance torture, often done before crowds or enemies as a show of absolute dominance. The Assyrians perfected this cruelty. They carved images into stone walls, showing flayed enemies pinned outside the gates of conquered cities. Their skin, stretched and nailed, hung like flags. In medieval Europe, rebels were sometimes flayed publicly, and their skin draped over church doors as a warning. In 14th century France, the chief minister of King Philip IV, Pierre de la Brosse, was accused of treason and flayed alive. His skin was tanned, turned into parchment, and displayed in court. Even the Aztecs, who worshipped flayed gods like Xiphotec, used the practice in ritual sacrifice. Priests would wear the flayed skins of victims during ceremonies, symbolizing rebirth through pain. To them, the shedding of skin was not just punishment, it was transformation. But what does it feel like? There are rare modern medical cases of degloving injuries where skin is torn off in accidents. Survivors describe a pain that surpasses imagination, a fire beneath the flesh, a screaming of nerves, a coldness that follows as the body spirals into shock. Now imagine that pain, deliberately applied, slowly, with an audience watching. Some victims were flayed partially, a hand, a face, the chest, kept alive to suffer humiliation before the final blow. Others were completely flayed, their organs visible through a weeping lattice of veins and muscle. Eventually, they would bleed out or go into cardiac arrest. Sometimes the executioner would display the empty skin, hollow like a grotesque balloon, tanned and stretched on frames. In the annals of cruelty, few punishments reach this level of deliberate artistic horror, and in the end, when the crowd dispersed and the blood cooled, only the skin remained, pinned to the walls as a testament to obedience. A man dies once, but a flayed man dies again and again, in memory, in legend, in nightmare. Chapter 21. The Brazen Bull. Screams of fire and brass. Now picture this. A giant bronze statue stands in the middle of a stone courtyard. Shaped like a powerful bull, with flaring nostrils and gleaming flanks, it looks like a tribute to some long-forgotten god of war. But this bull is not sacred. It is hollow, and inside, it is hungry. This is the Brazen Bull, a legendary execution device from ancient Greece, designed not only to kill, but to turn human suffering into music. According to legend, the Brazen Bull was invented by Perillos of Athens, who offered it to the tyrant Phalaris of Acragas in Sicily. The bull was cast entirely of bronze, with a side door for inserting the condemned. Beneath the belly was a furnace, and in the bull's head and nostrils a complex system of tubes. Now imagine being sentenced to the bull. The victim was stripped naked, shackled, and forced into the belly of the beast. The door was sealed tight, trapping them in darkness and metal. Then the fire was lit, hot, dry flames licking the bottom of the bull, heating the bronze from beneath. It didn't take long. The metal turned scalding, the air grew thin, every breath became a gasp, every gasp a scream. The body thrashed in, the darkness searing against the walls, skin blistered, then blackened, then fused to the hot metal. But the most horrifying part? The sound. You see, the bull's design wasn't just artistic, it was acoustic. Perillos had built the head to transform the victim's screams into animal-like bellows, echoing out through the nostrils like the roars of a furious bull. To the crowd outside, it was a performance. They heard the roaring of the beast, not the wailing of a man. And as the fire burned, so too did the cries turn into music, a symphony of suffering. Phalaris, according to the story, was delighted. He used the bull to execute criminals, rebels, even his own advisors. It became a symbol of state terror, a sculpture of agony. But there's a cruel twist in the tale. The inventor, Perilos, expected reward and glory. But Phalaris, ever the tyrant, decided to test the bull's realism on its own creator. He ordered Perilos placed inside, not to death, but just to the edge, burned and broken, a proof of concept. Some versions say Perilos was released afterward, only to be thrown off a cliff. Eventually, when Phalaris himself was overthrown, his enemies turned the bull on him. The tyrant who once fed men to flame was fed to the fire himself. Justice or poetic cruelty? Over centuries, the brazen bull passed into legend, a mix of myth and truth, but bronze bulls have been found in archaeological digs, fragments of horror cast in metal, and whether entirely real or not, the message remains. Some punishments were designed not just to kill, but to mock the victim's suffering, to amuse the powerful, to compose music from agony. So the next time you hear a hollow wind howling through pipes, imagine the scream behind it, the voice trapped inside the brass. Chapter 22, Lingqi, Death by 1,000 Cuts. The wind whispers softly through the trees of ancient Beijing. The square is quiet but not silent. You can hear the muffled weeping of families, the tense hush of a gathered crowd, the distant clang of a temple bell. At the center stands a wooden platform. Bound to a pole, arms stretched wide, is a condemned man. His face is pale, his eyes are resigned. He's not here for a beheading or hanging or anything so merciful. He has been sentenced to Lingqi, known in the West as death by 1,000 cuts. This punishment wasn't just a way to kill a person. It was a ritual, a message, a total destruction of the body and spirit, practiced for centuries in imperial China until it was outlawed in the early 1900s. Lingqi was reserved for the worst of the worst. Murderers of family members, traitors to the empire, and assassins of royals. Executioners trained for this specific task. Their job? To keep the victim alive for as long as possible while cutting them to pieces. The process began with smaller slices. A cheek, a strip of flesh from the arm, a sliver from the thigh. The blade was often no larger than a kitchen knife. Curved, slightly, always sharp. It was a sculptor's tool, not of beauty but of agony. The cuts came slow, deliberate. The executioner would remove the breasts, the muscles of the arms, the skin of the chest. Often the nose and ears were taken. Then the limbs, not severed immediately, but carved gradually, layer by layer, until bone gleamed beneath ribbons of skin. Some records claim as many as 3,000 incisions could be made before death. Sometimes, the victim was drugged with opium, not out of mercy, but to prolong the torture. The body would survive longer if the mind was dulled. Other times, no opiates were used at all. The prisoner remained fully conscious as their own flesh was stripped away like pages from a book. Each wound was a ceremony. The crowd watched not, in frenzy, but in silence. The power of Lingqi wasn't in blood. It was in dignity stripped away, slowly. The soul, it was believed, left the body in shame when no part of it remained whole. But there was more. This punishment wasn't just physical, it had spiritual consequences. In traditional Chinese belief, a person's body had to remain whole for the afterlife. To die in pieces meant the soul would never be reincarnated. You would wander the spirit world in agony, torn, nameless, incomplete. It was death beyond death. Photographs. Taken during the final years of Lingqi's use, especially in the early 1900s, show men still bound to posts, faces hollow, bodies carved to ruin. Some look toward the sky, others look down, but none seem angry, only broken. In one case, a man convicted of murdering his master was sentenced to lynchy. Witnesses said he endured nearly 30 minutes of cutting before he finally collapsed, dying only after the executioner sliced out his heart. It was an art form of cruelty, elevated by culture, made sacred through horror. And when the victim finally died, his disfigured body was often scattered, the remains discarded in fields, rivers, or burned. The executioner might be rewarded with silver. The spectators returned home, perhaps silently thanking the heavens it was not their day. In the end, what made lynchy so terrifying wasn't just the blood or the pain, but the idea of a soul shredded, denied even the dignity of death. So rest easy tonight, knowing your body lies whole beneath your blanket. But remember, in a different time, in a different place, every part of you could have been taken, one slice at a time. Chapter 23. The Heretic's Fork, a silence you cannot break. It is dark. Candlelight flickers across a damp stone wall. Chains rattle in the distance, echoing off the cold stone. Corridors of a medieval Inquisition chamber. There is no screaming here, not because there is no pain, but because screaming is impossible. The man in the center of the room wears a simple linen tunic soaked with sweat. His head is bent slightly, backward, mouth trembling. Between his chin and upper chest is a metal rod, a sharp-pronged tool jammed into his skin. Another spike rests just beneath his chin, pointing up. He's wearing the Heretic's Fork, a punishment tool used during the height of the Spanish Inquisition, a time when thoughts could be treason and words could be sin. The Heretic's Fork was a cruelly simple device. A metal rod with two pointed ends, attached by a strap around the neck or chest. One end stabbed into the soft flesh beneath the chin, the other pressed into the collarbone or upper sternum. Another version went from the throat to the lower jaw, or between the chest and chin, forcing the wearer's head into a fixed, agonizing posture. Here was the brilliance of its design. You could not move, you could not sleep, you could not cry out because any motion, even to scream, meant stabbing yourself in two places. The fork was often used on suspected heretics, those accused of denying church doctrine, speaking against the clergy, or even just thinking the wrong thing. A whisper of doubt could get you shackled, interrogated, and fitted with this cruel muzzle of silence. Sometimes the fork was worn for hours, sometimes for days. Victims would stand or kneel, their necks rigid, their bodies aching. If they dozed off, their heads would fall and the prongs would pierce deeper. If they cried out in pain, the spikes would tear flesh. If they coughed, shivered, or even breathed too sharply, more blood. But it was never about physical agony alone. The Heretic's Fork was a psychological punishment. It reminded the victim, constantly, even your thoughts must obey. You could be tortured not for what you did, but for what you believed. And now, gagged by metal and fear, all you could do was suffer in silence. The wearer was often paraded in public, displayed in markets outside churches, a living warning. Look too deeply into the Bible, argue with a priest, question a decree, this could be you. In some cases, the fork was engraved with words. I renounce on one end, I repent on the other. It didn't matter if the person was innocent. Confession was expected, but with the fork in place, they could confess nothing, and that was the point. Even torture could be elegant in the minds of inquisitors. Elegant and intimate, the fork didn't need fire or blade. It simply forced silence, enforced stillness, and slowly broke the will. Many prisoners fitted with the fork eventually died, not from the spikes, but from exhaustion, infection, or suicide. Others went mad. A few were released but never spoke again. They say the worst thing isn't screaming from pain. It's not being able to scream at all. As you lay tonight in your warm bed, free to move, to speak, to dream, spare. A thought for those who were denied the most basic freedom, the ability to cry out. Chapter 24. The Pair of Anguish. When silence was not an option. The room is stone and shadow, lit only by the glow of a single oil lamp. The scent of iron and old blood fills the air. A prisoner kneels in chains, shivering, his eyes locked, on the small, gleaming object resting in the torturer's palm. It looks harmless enough at first, like an odd fruit carved of metal, maybe 4 inches long. Its shape is round at the base and tapering at the top, like a bulb or a pear. But this is no fruit. This is the Pair of Anguish, one of the most disturbing torture devices ever conceived. Its beauty lies in its deception. The Pair of Anguish is a hollow metal shell made of 4 curved leaves, joined at the base and controlled by a central screw. When the screw is turned, the petals slowly open and open and open until they form a jagged, blooming metal flower. Now imagine that opening inside a human mouth, or down the throat, or in the rectum, or worse still, in the vagina of an accused witch. Yes, this device wasn't just for torture, it was often gendered. Women accused of heresy, witchcraft, or even fornication might face the pair. For blasphemers or liars, it was inserted into the mouth. For sodomites, into the anus. And for women who defied religious authority, it was forced into the vagina. Then came the twist. The screw would be turned slowly, the metal leaves would spread, flesh would be torn, muscles ruptured, and the victim, unable to scream, unable to beg, would be reduced to silent, contorted agony. The psychological terror of the pair was as powerful as the physical damage it caused. Victims were often shown the device beforehand, told what it would do, and then given a chance to confess. But here's the nightmare. Confessions rarely spared them. They merely delayed the inevitable. And it wasn't just the pain. The shame was part of the punishment. The insertion itself, done publicly or privately, was a violation of the body and soul. For many women, the mere idea of such a punishment was worse than death, and for those who survived the torture, lifelong injury followed. Incontinence, organ damage, mutilation of reproductive organs. There are accounts, apocryphal yet chilling, of pairs being heated over fire before use, or inserted and then kicked or yanked, rupturing organs instantly. While many versions of the device remain in museums, historians debate whether the pair was used frequently or ceremonially, but its existence alone speaks to the cruelty of its age. And remember, it was not designed to kill. It was designed to mutilate, to silence, to humiliate, to make an example. A woman accused of sorcery in 16th century France was reportedly gagged with the pair during her trial. She had spoken too freely, too confidently. The church feared her words could sway the crowd. After the device was used, she never spoke again. Tonight, as you lie in the comfort of your room, reflect on this. There were times in history when the worst thing you could do was speak. A single word could brand you, a whisper could condemn you, and if you dared to protest, well, the pair was waiting. Chapter 25. The Lead Sprinkler. Holy Water from Hell. Imagine a priest lifting a silver vessel to sprinkle holy water at a baptism. The delicate droplets fall gently, symbolizing purity, salvation, and new beginnings. Now, invert that image. Imagine instead a metal flask, ornate and deadly, filled not with water, but with molten lead, boiling oil, or even liquid silver. The flask has a long handle, a perforated cap, and beneath that cap, death waits in liquid form. This is the lead sprinkler, a device of torture so insidious it mocked the symbols of grace while delivering unspeakable pain. The lead sprinkler was used by inquisitors across Europe, particularly during the later years of the Spanish Inquisition. Victims were often heretics, witches, or those accused of conspiring against the church, but sometimes it was used in dungeons without reason at all, because cruelty didn't always need a justification. Here's how it worked. The metal flask was filled with molten metal, often lead or tin, and then slowly poured or shaken over a prisoner's body through its perforated cap. The cap turned the flow into a deadly rain, sprinkling tiny, searing droplets across the face, chest, or back. The pain was immediate and absolute. Molten lead melts skin on contact. It burns through tissue, fusing clothing to the body and leaving behind massive blistered craters. Even the smallest splash could cause permanent disfigurement, and the psychological terror? Unmeasurable. The mere sight of the sprinkler being filled, its liquid contents bubbling and hissing, was enough to drive prisoners into panic. Sometimes the torturer would target the eyes. A single drop in the eye would boil it within seconds. Other times, the lead was poured into open wounds or forced into the mouth. In rare executions, molten metal was poured down the throat, a method used by Mongols, Romans, and later by Spanish inquisitors. Death was instant, but the message was eternal. One notorious case tells of a nobleman accused of heresy. The church demanded he reveal the names of fellow dissenters. He refused. Over 3 days, he was strapped to a rack, while molten oil was sprinkled across his stomach. 1 drop at a time, he never confessed. Some inquisitors justified the sprinkler with twisted logic, claiming the heat of metal would purify the soul. Others didn't bother with excuses. It was simply effective. Fear worked. The worst part? The lead sprinkler was small and portable. It could be used anywhere. On prisoners bound in cells, on kneeling victims in town squares, even on women and children whose bodies could be disfigured for life with a single shake of the hand. And when the molten metal ran out, the sprinkler didn't stop. It could be refilled with boiling water, acid, or tar, each variation producing a different kind of nightmare. Today, several of these devices survive in museums. Their surfaces are tarnished, their nozzles rusted. But hold one in your hand, and you can still feel the ghost of its heat. It wasn't a weapon of war. It wasn't a tool of justice. It was punishment masquerading as ritual, the sacred turned into savagery. So tonight, as you sleep in peace, far from the fires of Inquisition, remember this. There were ages when cruelty wore the robes of faith, and blessings came from a flask filled with death. Are you still awake? Chapter 26. Brazen Bull, the metal monster of Sicily. The sun sets on ancient Sicily, casting long shadows across the marble steps of the tyrant's palace. The air is thick with incense and fear. In the palace courtyard, a curious statue gleams. Its polished bronze skin glows red in the firelight. It's shaped like a bull, perfect in form, life-sized, hollow. A hatch at its side swings open. This is no art piece. This is the Brazen Bull, also known as the Sicilian Bull, and it is one of the most horrifying execution devices in recorded history. Its creation is credited to Perilos of Athens, a metalworker and inventor. Around the 6th century BCE, Perilos presented the device to Phalaris, the cruel tyrant of Agrigentum, as a new way to execute enemies. It will please the gods, he claimed, a sacrifice and a spectacle. The concept was sinister in its elegance. The condemned would be forced inside the bronze bull through a hidden trapdoor. Once sealed in, a fire was lit beneath the belly of the beast. As the metal heated, the person inside would begin to roast alive, slowly, flesh blistered, skin melted, muscles cooked against hot bronze. But the true horror was in the bull's design, Perillos had engineered a system of pipes and tubes within the bull's skull that distorted the victim's screams. As the person inside screamed in agony, their voice would echo through the bull's head and emerge from its mouth as a sound eerily similar to a bellowing animal. The crowd wouldn't hear screams. They'd hear the bull come to life. It was spectacle, theater, murder wrapped in a myth. Perillos himself was said to be the first to test it. According to legend, after demonstrating the bull's acoustic feature, Phalaris asked him to climb inside to see if it worked. He did. The door was slammed shut. The fire was lit. Whether this tale is true or apocryphal, the message is clear. In tyrannical courts, no innovation went unpunished. But the brazen bull was more than just an execution. It was psychological warfare. It was placed in public spaces. Citizens were forced to watch as the condemned were roasted inside. The metal bull became a symbol of obedience. Fall in line or burn like an animal. Imagine the experience. Inside, the temperature would rise slowly. First unbearable heat, then darkness, then the realization there is no escape. As your skin touches the heated walls, it fuses. Air becomes smoke. You scream, but your voice is twisted, mocked by the very bull consuming you. Outside, the crowd hears laughter, grotesque bellowing. The execution is complete when the bull's mouth falls silent. The ashes left inside were often collected and scattered to the winds. No grave, no marker, no remembrance. The Romans later adopted similar methods. Nero is rumored to have used a variant for his own amusement, but the bull would live on in memory as the most gruesome of death machines, elegant in form, barbaric in purpose. To this day, bronze bulls can be found in art museums and mythology. But now, as you drift into sleep, know this: once upon a time, one of them may have bellowed with the cries of the damned. Chapter 27. Scaphism, the death of 1,000 mouths. The lake is still. The reeds sway gently under a moonlit sky. Somewhere, in the middle of the water, floats a wooden structure, 2 canoes or hollowed logs bound together. Inside it, a man lies strapped, his limbs tied down. His body is bare. His mouth, still free, gasps for air as the boat bobs under the stars. This isn't a prisoner transport. It's a death sentence, and this is the most grotesque execution. Devised in the ancient Persian Empire, scaphism, also known as the boats. Herodotus, the father of history, recorded it with horror in his scrolls. The victim was placed between 2 narrow canoes or hollow shells. His head, arms and legs protruded, but his torso was sealed within. Then came the feeding. He would be force-fed milk and honey until he could take no more. Diarrhea set in quickly. The mixture was poured over his face, in his eyes, and even into his wounds. He was then pushed out onto stagnant water, exposed to the sun and the biting swarms. And then, nature took over. Flies came first, swarms of them, attracted by the sweetness and the filth. They laid eggs in his skin, in his eyes, his mouth. His intestines swelled with rot. As he screamed, insects burrowed into him. Maggots festered in wounds that never closed. He remained alive for days, sometimes weeks. Each morning, more honey, more milk. The Persians made sure he stayed alive barely. His suffering was the point. The execution wasn't a clean kill. It was a theater of decomposition. His body became a banquet for bugs, birds, and time itself. It wasn't just death. It was biological breakdown. His body bloated, skin peeled, worms nested, eyes crusted shut. His tongue, swollen with flies, could no longer scream. This method was reserved for traitors, murderers of royalty, and the most despised criminals. The slow pace, the humiliating exposure, the living consumption by nature, it was meant to show that even in death, your soul would not escape judgment. There's one recorded case that haunts the imagination: Mithridates, a Persian soldier. who murdered King Artaxerxes' brother. For his crime, he was sentenced to scaphism. According to Herodotus, he lasted 17 days, 17 long, boiling, rotting days in the sun as his body dissolved into itself. Think about that. No sharp blade, no noose, no flame, just food, feces, insects, and time. The victim's own body became the tool of his undoing. As you lie in bed tonight, safe in your walls and blankets, imagine drifting alone in the darkness. Your only companions the buzz of wings and the gnaw of hunger, and realize for some punishment wasn't fire or steel, it was nature itself, weaponized. Chapter 28. Lingqi, Death by 1,000 Cuts. China, the Imperial Court. The year is 1905. A crowd gathers in a dusty courtyard outside a prison in Beijing. There is no platform, no fire, no gallows, just a man bound tightly to a wooden cross. His chest rises and falls with shallow breaths. He is shirtless, shaking. His eyes are wide open, fixed on the sky. His fate is already sealed. He has been sentenced to Lingqi, also known as death by 1,000 cuts. Lingqi was one of the most excruciating methods of execution in Chinese history. Practiced for over 1,000 years and reserved for crimes deemed unforgivable. Treason, parricide, blasphemy. It was not simply about ending a life. It was about tearing it apart, bit by bit, while the world watched. The process began with restraint. The condemned was tied to a wooden frame, arms and legs spread, chest exposed. A skilled executioner approached, blade in hand. But this wasn't a butcher's job. It was an art form of cruelty. The first cuts were deliberate and shallow, slices to the chest, thighs, and shoulders. The idea was not to kill quickly, but to create maximum suffering. The executioner would slice off strips of flesh, avoiding arteries, keeping the victim alive through most of the ordeal. One cut, then another, then dozens more. Hundreds of spectators might witness it, some with curiosity, others with horror. The sound of slicing, the slow collapse of the body, the agonizing groans that turned to whimpers. Blood would soak the ground, but death, real final death, would be held at bay. At times, opium was administered to dull the pain slightly, but mostly to prolong life, because the punishment wasn't about mercy. It was about public degradation. Even after death, the mutilated corpse was often dismembered further and discarded without burial rites. Why? Because in traditional Confucian belief, preserving the body was essential to spiritual integrity. To destroy the body this way meant destroying the soul's peace, a punishment that transcended death itself. One of the most infamous cases occurred in 1905, during the final years of the Qing dynasty. A man named Feng Jizhai was convicted of murdering his master. He was brought to public square and subjected to Lingqi. Photographs of this gruesome execution still exist, one of the few documented records of Lingqi before it was finally outlawed that same year. Those images continue to haunt historians and human rights scholars today. Imagine it. The sun beating down, the smell of blood in the air. The slow dismantling of a human being, not with rage but with ritual precision. The eyes of the condemned fading into silence while the knife continues its merciless work. Lingqi was not just an execution. It was a declaration, a warning etched in flesh, a spectacle designed to burn itself into memory. Tonight, as you lie in the safety of your bed, remember that in another time, in another place, 1,000 small blades carved history's most painful whisper into the world. Chapter 29. Keel hauling, the sailor's nightmare. The sea is calm. The sky is iron. Grey. A British warship floats quietly off the coast of Antigua in the 18th century. Its crew gathers on deck, boots creaking on planks, eyes cast down. A rope is thrown over the side. A sailor, wrists bound, face pale, is dragged forward. His crime, mutiny. His sentence, keel-hauling. Of all the punishments used at sea, keel-hauling stands alone in its brutality and indifference to survival. It was less a punishment and more a mariner's death sentence, designed not just to kill, but to terrorize the crew into obedience. The condemned was tied to ropes, one end at the left side of the ship, the other to the right. On command, he was hoisted off the deck and dropped into the sea, only to be dragged underneath the ship's keel, the sharp, barnacle-covered spine that stretched from bow to stern. It wasn't the water that killed most men. It was the wood and coral attached to the hull. Ships in those days were often caked in hardened barnacles, jagged like knives, sharp as razors. As the man was pulled underneath, every inch of his body would be torn open, shredded by these unseen teeth beneath. The waves, skin flayed, eyes gouged, flesh ground into ribbons. And yet, they didn't always want him to die. Sometimes the sailor would be dragged back up, gasping, choking, bleeding, then sent down again and again. A full keel-hauling could take over an hour, and many succumbed to blood loss, drowning, or shock. The sea, ever indifferent, took its payment. It was used most famously by the Dutch Navy in the 17th century, though British and French vessels adopted it for extreme cases. It served as a stark warning to any sailor with rebellious thoughts. The ship itself will punish you. What made keel-hauling so terrifying was the helplessness. There was no resistance, no reprieve. Once submerged, the water muffled screams. The rope dragged you, flipped you, ripped you apart. Some captains used it not just as punishment, but to break spirits. It was slow, surgical, and soaked in salt. One recorded case from 1777 tells of a sailor named John Milburn, keel-hauled off the coast of Antigua for insubordination. He survived, but was blind in one eye, with his back torn so badly he never sailed again. Imagine the ocean as your coffin, the hull your executioner, and barnacles your blade. There are no crowds here, just the quiet judgment of your shipmates and the cold pull of the tide. As you drift into sleep, let the sound of waves lull you, but remember, not all who sink come up the same. Still with me? Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us, where are you from, and what time is it right now? Chapter 30, Iron Chair, the Seat of Agony. The air is thick with the scent of scorched flesh. Chains rattle. A hooded executioner steps aside, revealing the instrument of torment, a massive metal chair studded with hundreds of iron spikes. Welcome to 18th century Europe, perhaps in Germany or France or Italy. The borders mattered little. What mattered was the message. This was the Iron Chair, a punishment so visceral, so grotesque, that it was designed as much for psychological horror as for physical suffering. The chair was constructed from solid iron, cold and unforgiving, its seat, backrest, armrests, and leg supports all bristling with small, razor-sharp spikes, over 1,000 in total. They were not long enough to cause instant death, but sharp enough to pierce skin, nerves, and muscle. The victim wouldn't be impaled so much as slowly perforated. The condemned was stripped naked and forced down onto the chair, pressed into the spikes. Screams usually began at that first contact, but that was just the beginning. Iron clamps would bind the arms and legs, pushing the body down deeper into the spikes. Some versions of the chair included spikes on the footrest and arm clamps, ensuring no part of the body was spared. As blood pooled beneath the chair, the executioner would often take his time reading aloud the charges. Justice, they said, must be seen and felt. But there was a deadlier element yet: fire. Many versions of the Iron Chair were fitted with a brazier beneath the seat. Once the victim was secured, a fire would be lit below, turning the metal into a slow-burning oven. The spikes, now heated, would sear the wounds they had already created, inflicting unimaginable pain and preventing the victim from bleeding out quickly. It wasn't just torture. It was delayed incineration. Sometimes the victim was kept alive on the chair for hours, even days. Priests might be summoned to extract a confession. Crowds would watch, their faces twisted between awe and horror, and always the chair remained silent, cold, and hungry for the next soul. Records of the iron chair appear from the medieval period through to the early modern era, but its use peaked in the 17th and 18th centuries, especially during the Inquisition. It was particularly effective at instilling terror without needing mass executions. One glance at the chair was often enough to bring an accused heretic to their knees. What makes it so chilling is how still the punishment was. There was no whipping, no flailing, just the victim, motionless, bleeding slowly, burning slowly, utterly trapped in silence. Tonight, as you settle in beneath your warm blankets, imagine for a moment the cold bite of metal beneath you. Imagine how still you'd have to sit just to avoid pressing deeper into the pain. Would you confess, or would you stay silent? Chapter 31. Crocodile Shears, the King's Quietest Threat. Let us journey now into the realm of royal paranoia, where betrayal wasn't punished merely by death, but by symbolic obliteration. Enter the crocodile shears, an obscure yet profoundly disturbing device once used in medieval and early modern Europe, particularly in England and France. Its purpose, not to kill, but to erase. The crocodile shears looked deceptively simple at first glance, like a pair of long iron pincers. But upon closer inspection, the horror became clear. The shears were shaped like a crocodile's open mouth, the interior lined with jagged, serrated spikes, and the tip shaped to close around a very specific body part. The penis. Yes. This tool was a punishment almost exclusively reserved for men accused of attempting to assassinate the monarch, and its message was brutal. You tried to end the king's line, so your line ends with you. The condemned was stripped, bound, and forced to stand or kneel before a small crowd of nobles, guards, and clergy. The shears would be heated in a brazier until glowing red, then clamped onto the penis with crushing force. The spikes dug in instantly. Some were designed to merely mutilate. Others were meant to rip it off entirely, especially when twisted or yanked. Sometimes this was the end, death, by shock, bleeding, or infection. Other times, the victim would be kept alive, castrated and broken, to live in humiliation for the remainder of his days. This wasn't just physical punishment, it was political theater. The shears were often used in secret trials, away from the public eye, a silent execution of legacy rather than of life. Kings feared not only the blade, but the dynastic ambition of rivals. The crocodile shears answered that fear with permanent disfigurement. We have no surviving examples of the shears in museums today, but they are recorded in medieval torture manuals and certain court documents. Some historians debate how widespread their use really was, whether they were a common punishment or a rare execution tool, but all agree on one thing: their psychological impact was unmatched. In an age when manhood was equated with legacy, land and lineage, to lose this part of yourself wasn't just mutilation, it was social annihilation. Imagine the silence of that chamber. No crowds, no cheering, just the hiss of hot iron, the whimper of a man who would never father children again, and the quiet nod of a king whose power had just been secured. As the flames die low and the night grows still, think of how many punishments in history weren't meant to kill the body, but to break the will. Chapter 32. The lead sprinkler, death by drops. Tonight, our path winds deeper into the dark corridors of medieval interrogation chambers, damp, echoing and reeking of sweat, blood and molten metal. Amid the racks and wheels, one device waits patiently in the shadows, small, unassuming and terribly deceptive. It's called the lead sprinkler, a tool of death that turned liquid metal into hellfire rain. At first glance it resembled something ordinary, a metal mace-like rod, with a perforated or slotted bulb at the end. It might even be mistaken for a cooking implement. But make no mistake, this tool was forged not for food or farming, but for inflicting unforgettable agony. The bulb was hollow, its interior filled with a deadly substance, molten lead, boiling oil, or sometimes molten silver or pitch. Once heated to the point of bubbling fury, the executioner would grip the long handle and approach the bound prisoner. The victim might be tied to a wooden chair, arms behind their back, head tilted backward by ropes, or perhaps splayed out on a stone slab. Either way, there was no escape. The executioner would then slowly tilt the lead sprinkler, just enough to release a few searing droplets at a time. Where did it land? Often the eyes or the mouth pried open by force. Sometimes it would be dripped along the back, down the spine, or into the ears. Tiny hissing drops that cooked the flesh on contact. The smell, a sickening blend of burnt skin and molten metal, impossible to forget. The cruelty of this device was its measured pace. Unlike beheadings or burnings at the stake, the lead sprinkler delivered torture by degrees. One drop, a scream, another drop, a convulsion. Each droplet wasn't meant to kill immediately. It was meant to wear down the soul, to soften resistance, to break silence. And it worked. Tales of the lead sprinkler echo most loudly during the Spanish Inquisition, where it was used to extract confessions from accused heretics. It also appeared in parts of Renaissance Italy and occasionally during witch trials across Europe. But unlike the more public punishments, this was a tool used behind closed doors, in stone chambers where priests and torturers whispered about damnation and salvation. What makes this punishment so chilling is how controlled it was. This wasn't bloodlust, it was precision pain. Science turned against the body, the slow burn, the calculated drip, the irreversible blindness. Sometimes the torturer would show mercy by turning the sprinkler fully over and pouring the contents directly into the mouth, ending it all in a boiling instant. Others weren't so lucky. As you lie in the comfort of your room, perhaps listening to the soft ticking of a clock or the gentle hum of night, imagine being trapped in a moment where each second held the threat of another burning drop. Chapter 33. Execution by Elephant. The beast that judged men. Picture a grand courtyard in ancient India or Southeast Asia, where the scent of jasmine mingles with the anticipation of blood. Courtiers watch from balconies. Priests murmur. Drums pound. A hush falls as the star of the spectacle lumbers forward. The elephant, not just any elephant. This beast has been trained for years to execute humans on command. It does not act from instinct, but by order. Welcome to the ancient punishment, known as execution by elephant, a method used across India, Sri Lanka, Burma, and parts of the Middle East for over 2,000 years. Unlike the cold indifference of blades or fire, this was a punishment carried out by a living creature, intelligent and precise. Royal elephants were trained not only to crush, but to draw out the death according to the ruler's will. A man accused of treason, theft, or betrayal would be brought before the elephant, often in chains. The crowd would roar or whisper, depending on the kingdom's custom. The executioner, not a hooded man, but a mahout, the elephant's handler, who stood nearby giving subtle commands. With one signal, the elephant might extend its trunk and smash the prisoner's skull like a melon. Quick, clean, merciful, but other times, mercy was not the goal. If the condemned was to suffer, the elephant might first break the arms and legs, one by one, with terrifying precision. A forefoot raised, a pause, then a sickening crunch. The victim would scream, the crowd would gasp, and yet the elephant obeyed, never crushing the chest until commanded. In some accounts, the elephant would use its tusks to toss the victim like a rag doll, or press them against the ground until bones splintered and organs ruptured. Occasionally, iron blades or spikes were affixed to the tusks, turning the elephant into a walking execution machine. This punishment was not merely practical, it was deeply symbolic. The elephant represented royal power, divine authority, and the might of the state. To die beneath its feet was to be judged not by man alone, but by the embodiment of the empire's will. The Mughal emperors, the kings of Siam, and rulers of ancient Indian dynasties all used elephants for capital punishment. Even Alexander the Great reportedly witnessed such an execution during his campaigns in India, and was both horrified and fascinated. Western observers who travelled to the East in the 17th and 18th centuries wrote of this with a mix of awe and revulsion. To them, the elephant was majestic, noble, and now terrifying. What made this punishment so haunting was its intimacy. The elephant was not a machine. It moved slowly. It could pause. It could look the condemned in the eyes. Death was no longer distant. It stood before you, breathing, blinking, waiting for the command. As night wraps around you and your own heartbeat slows beneath your blanket, consider the moment a man looked up and saw not a hangman's noose, but two dark eyes and a rising foot. Chapter 34. Rat Torture. The Living Furnace. You're lying flat, bound tightly to a wooden board. Your arms and legs are tied down, your breath shallow, your heart hammering like a trapped bird. The room is dank. The torchlight flickers. Then they bring forward a metal bucket. It doesn't seem terrifying until you notice it squirming. Inside the bucket are rats, 4 of them, wild and hungry. The torturer places the open end of the bucket against your bare abdomen, and then they start heating it. This was rat torture, a horrifying method of execution that turned nature itself into a weapon. It wasn't invented by any one culture, but appeared throughout history, in ancient China, medieval Europe, and even in South America, with different variations, but one chilling goal: let the rats dig their way to freedom, through you. The bucket is gradually heated from the outside, sometimes by fire, sometimes by red-hot coals. The rats panic. Their instinct is to escape the heat, but there's only one direction to go: down into your flesh. First you feel the scratching, then the gnawing. Small teeth break skin, and the pain spikes with panic. They chew, claw, burrow. You scream, of course. But the rats don't stop. They're frantic now. They tunnel deeper, ripping through abdominal tissue, organs, blood vessels. In some cases, victims died within minutes from blood loss. In others, they lingered, alive as the rats ate their way in. This method was designed not only to kill, but to terrorize. There was no dignity in this death, no heroism, just a body devoured from the inside out. The Tower of London, supposedly, employed rat torture in its infamous underground cells, using the nearby River Thames to trap rodents for torment. In South America, Spanish colonizers reportedly used a similar technique against rebels and native leaders, placing rats in clay pots on the stomach, then lighting fires underneath. But one of the most famous accounts comes from Diederik Sonoy, a Dutch noble during the 16th century 80 Years' War. His version? He forced rats into a cage laid on the stomach, then heated the cage's back end with fire, causing the rats to claw their way into the prisoner's gut, slowly, screaming all the while. And perhaps most chilling of all, this method didn't always kill, In some interrogations, the goal wasn't death but confession. The torture would stop just before fatal damage, leaving the victim alive, but forever changed. A walking corpse, traumatized by the memory of scratching claws and internal pain. Close your eyes now. Picture the feel of tiny pores on your skin, the heat rising, the slow realization that you are the only way out. Chapter 35. The Brazen Bull, roasted alive in bronze. In the golden light of ancient Greece, where philosophers debated truth and sculptors chiseled gods into marble, something far more sinister was born, a punishment so horrifying, so theatrical, it left a legacy of screams cast in bronze. It was called the Brazen Bull. Imagine a life-sized bull made of solid metal, beautiful, polished, gleaming in the sun. But this was no idol. It was a furnace, hollowed out from the inside, large enough to fit a grown man. The condemned would be stripped and shoved into the belly of the beast. The metal door was bolted shut behind them. Beneath the bull, a roaring fire was lit. The metal began to heat. The prisoner trapped inside began to sweat, gasp, scream. And here's where the twisted genius of this device emerged. The bull was constructed with acoustic tubes and vents, designed so that the victim's screams would echo through the bull's nostrils, transformed into the sound of a bellowing animal. To spectators, it sounded as if the bull itself had come alive. This wasn't just execution, it was performance. The inventor of the brazen bull, according to legend, was Perilos of Athens, who presented it to Phalaris, a cruel tyrant of Acragas, modern-day Sicily. Perilos boasted that it would convert pain into music. The tyrant, amused but suspicious, decided to test it on Perilos himself. He had him locked inside. As the fire burned, Perilos screamed. The bull bellowed. Pleased with the result, Phalaris let him out, then promptly threw him off a cliff. But the bull remained. This device was not merely a method of death, it was a message sent to all who dared to defy tyrants. It told you, if you resist, you will not die quietly, you will become a spectacle, you will burn, and the world will cheer. It was used not just by the Greeks, but later by the Romans, who saw its theatrical value. Emperor Nero, known for his love of drama and cruelty, allegedly revived the use of the brazen bull for Christians and enemies of the state. What made the bull especially evil was its efficiency. The fire beneath could burn for hours. The metal glowed red. Inside, the prisoner roasted slowly, flesh cooking against bronze, air turning to flame. Death did not come swiftly. It came inch by inch, breath by breath. And once it was over, the door would be opened. The scorched remains of the victim would be scraped out with hooks, and the bull would be polished, ready for the next act. Today, no original brazen bull survives, but the symbol remains, whispered in horror stories and etched into medieval manuscripts. It reminds us that cruelty can wear a beautiful mask, that even art can kill. So next time you see a sculpture, consider, was it made to honor or to punish? And as your eyelids grow heavy, let the echoes of the bull's bellow fade into the silence. Like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more from the darkest corners of the past, and drop a comment telling us your city and the hour on your clock. We wonder, will you be awake for what comes next? Chapter 36. The Human Drum, the Forgotten Rhythm of Power. In the shadows of history, behind palaces and across blood-soaked battlefields, there existed a punishment so brutal, so utterly dehumanizing, that even whispers of it were drowned by the beating of war drums. This is the story of a punishment where human suffering was transformed into music, the human drum. This grotesque practice is said to have occurred in various forms across different regions, but one of the most infamous legends hails from Southeast Asia. where warriors of ancient kingdoms sought to strike terror into the hearts of their enemies, not just with blades, but with rhythm. According to some oral traditions and historical speculations, the skin of a living or freshly executed prisoner was stretched across a hollowed-out drum, often a large ceremonial war drum. These drums weren't just instruments, they were statements, symbols of absolute control. The transformation of a human being into an object, a warning, a beat that signaled victory, and a reminder of what awaited those who defied the ruler. Some accounts claim that the condemned were not killed instantly. Instead, flayed alive, a slow, methodical peeling of the skin, while still conscious, the victim would feel their body unmake itself in the searing sun. Their screams became a part of the ritual. Once the skin was removed, it was carefully cleaned, stretched and dried before being fastened to the surface of a drum. The more painful and protracted the process, the more sacred the drum was believed to be. There are eerie tales that such drums, when played, created a sound unlike any other, deep, mournful, as if the soul trapped within the skin still echoed. Through the hollow chamber, soldiers believed it carried the power of the fallen, a ghostly force to strengthen the army and frighten enemies with each beat. In imperial China, some stories, perhaps apocryphal, perhaps hidden in forbidden scrolls, hint at similar practices in fringe provinces. Criminals or traitors who had committed unspeakable acts were said to be skinned and transformed into drumheads, used only during rituals of national crisis or great wars. Their suffering would symbolically amplify the emperor's decree of justice. What makes this punishment particularly terrifying is the symbolism. It wasn't just about inflicting pain or death. It was about obliteration, erasing identity, dignity, even the recognition of being human. You weren't merely executed. You were turned into an object to be beaten upon, a skin stretched and nailed, echoing the rhythms of your conqueror. The memory of these punishments doesn't survive in monuments or museums. You won't find the human drum on display behind velvet ropes. These are the whispers between the lines of history, stories suppressed by shame, horror, or disbelief, but they endure in the darkest corners of the past. And sometimes the beat of a distant drum still stirs a chill deep in our bones. And so we come to the end of this chilling journey, a descent through the darkest alleys of human cruelty. From iron maidens to human drums, each punishment we uncovered wasn't just an act of violence. It was a message, a spectacle, a terrifying mirror held up to society's obsession with power, control, and fear. What does it say about us, about the civilizations we've built, that such punishments ever existed? Perhaps history's greatest lesson is not in what we celebrate, but in what we choose to forget. If this journey kept you company tonight, if it opened your eyes or even made your skin crawl just a little, then let's stay curious together. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so that more people can explore the strange, the haunting, and the hidden with us. And before you drift into sleep, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? You never know what history unfolded beneath your very feet. Until next time, sleep softly, but never stop wondering. Because even in the silence of the night, history whispers, and sometimes it screams.